not as an Ebola expert either, but as a lifelong extension person who's spent a career looking at how this university and other land-grant universities respond to the most important issues that are facing people, both in the communities of Missouri, but also across the nation and around the world. So my perspective is really as an extension worker who knows that this kind of work is critical, and that we, those of us gathered on this campus and the other affiliated land grants around the country, really are some of the best prepared and the most capable of responding to crises like the Ebola crisis or others. In my career, I've had a chance to see the university mobilize around things like the flood of 1993, where we drew in almost every academic department and every unit. I see people nodding. And we pulled together and we built both immediate emergency responses, but we also built long-term sustainability with community emergency management teams, with a group called the Extension Disaster Education Network that is a connection. So I know we have the capacity to do it. We mobilized a few years ago, and Brady, I can't remember this, around the avian flu. We were fearful that that was going to sweep across the country and create a public health crisis for us. And so I remember meeting over at the vet school and talking about how do we come together collaboratively to bring all of our unique disciplines in so that we are better, that we help the people we serve, the citizens in this state and around the world, be prepared and be healthy and productive. So I'm excited because I know we have the capacity to do this. I think Ebola is a really important example to choose. I am not an Ebola expert, as I said, but I have for the last 5 years worked really closely with the 4-H program in Liberia. And you might not realize it, but the 4-H program there was very robust before the terrible conflicts and wars. It was destroyed along with much of the country infrastructure during their decade of conflict. And about 5 or 6 years ago, 5 young men, university college students, like many of you in the room, who were working on degrees, said, what can we do to help rebuild both the food productivity, the civic engagement, the leadership of young people in Liberia? And they said, you know what, we're going to restart the 4-H program. And those who don't know, that's Head, Heart, Hands, and Health. It's a learning by doing. Started out mostly and only for agricultural kids, but now serves young people in every kind of community. But it's really a capacity building initiative that focuses on 6 to 18-year-olds. And so these 5 young men, like many of the students we heard today and saw out in the poster session, reached into their own pockets, went out to 5 or 8 schools and said, we want to help you start a 4-H club, we're going to give you money to start a garden, and we're going to grow food at that garden, and we're also going to teach you some new improved gardening practices, and are you interested? And the response was very, very positive. Since that time, my role has been, and I was part of the Gates Foundation grant that worked with 4-H programs in sub-Saharan Africa. My role has been to do training, consulting, capacity building, advising to them so that they grew their own capacity to reach more young people in Liberia. You guys from Alabama, from Auburn, would be happy to hear they got a World Food Program grant, for example. And they started 4-H clubs with gardens that contributed to the school feeding program. So my point in sharing all that is what I want to talk to you about is how we bring that a human ecological perspective, the kinds of things that Extension and our university has done and knows how to do. I'll talk a little bit about the background of what I mean by this human ecological perspective, and then I'm going to ask you to look at where might you fit in that? What is it that your unique talent, academic discipline, area of interest might contribute as we think about the Ebola situation? So you are going to have a short quiz in a little bit. So be thinking about what your answer might be from your academic perspective. So for me, I'm trained in education, non-formal education, and human development. These are basically 2 4-H clubs standing in front of their gardens. One of them is in Zambia, and one of them is somewhere in California. So I think there are many human ecological principles that are common, or that are universal, but we have to look at them with a cultural lens. And I want to hit a few things. I think several of us have treated this as an opportunity to educate people about a unique field. In human development, we talk about human ecology. And Dr. Jürgen Grafenbrenner, who was at Cornell, who's kind of the foundational creator of this model, basically said there are multiple systems that all of us are part of. The individual human is right there in the middle, and our unique characteristics are very, very important. But around us are the systems of family, of school, and then further out there are the systems of our police departments and our neighborhoods, and further out there's public policy and health systems and all of that. And all of us are in those systems. We impact them and they impact us. So it's bidirectional. And historic events and the time that we live and all those kinds of things make a difference. And I would say, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, as you think about Ebola and your unique position within this university, where might you fit in this kind of system as we think about the Ebola crisis? So that's what your quiz is going to be about. So memorize this, I'll put it up in a minute. So, okay. I think the other thing is in a human development perspective or human ecology, we know that there's a basic hierarchy of human needs, and that as our university thinks about the Ebola crisis, we may be able to impact both those basic physiological needs, of food and shelter, and we know that human beings have to meet those the needs at the bottom of that pyramid before we can start to move up into the next levels of the hierarchy needs of safety, education, and eventually more productivity and contribution. So that's another basic principle I think we have to apply as we think about how we might impact Ebola. It's a lifespan piece. As I said, I work in programs for children and families. And we know that across the lifespan, human beings change and their developmental needs change and their capacity change. And so as we think about the Ebola crisis, we have to think about who, and I'm really thinking about Liberia. I think my colleagues here focus more, and rightly so, on the public health issues as they play out perhaps in this country. But anytime we think about our response, and we bring a human ecological perspective, we have to think about what about the infants, the toddlers, the 6-year-olds, the 15, the 18, the young parents, and on through that age spectrum. So that's a critical piece of our thinking. Several of you noticed today, I am a big harper on the issue of gender, because gender really does matter as we think about what this university can do and about public health issues like Ebola. This is, if you haven't seen, the Nike Foundation has a wonderful resource called The Girl Effect, and they're looking at young women from 13 to 18, particularly in developing nations, and what are the challenges that they face in order to be able to be productive, contributing members of their community. And they basically say that in many places around the world, and I was talking with some of my colleagues back here in the poster session, for young women, once they reach puberty, once they begin to menstruate, once they are able to reproduce, the world closes down for them. And so as we think about what we can do from this university's perspective, how do we address those needs? I had to pull out one thing. Yesterday's paper, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, how a sanitary pad can change a life. And focusing on the fact that young women may not be able to continue their education in Ethiopia if they're menstruating, they can't come to school, or they drop out of school, and so forth. So we have to, from a human ecological perspective, understanding how we respond to Ebola or any other issue or need, look at this gender lens and this lifespan lens. Okay, I'm almost to the part where you have to do the quiz. The other piece, I think, from the human ecological perspective, and several of the other speakers, it's been interesting to me today, all of us use our own jargon from our own field. So my ag economics friends use a set of terms. My public health friends use a set of terms. I use a set of terms because of my work in extension as a human development person. One of the things that if we can figure out how to talk to each other across those terms and really look at what are the commonalities of what we're doing, I heard so many common things across the disciplines, but we didn't use the same language. So as we think about a university response, finding ways to have a common language, or at least a language that we can understand, is important. For example, resilience. I think of it in terms of individual resilience. And one of the exciting things about a human ecological approach, perspective, is that human beings have the capacity for change. Human beings are incredibly resourceful and capable, and we can help them both reduce the risk factors that in their lives, and we can help them increase the protective factors. And for us as a university community, we may be able to say we can impact, this came out of the substance abuse field, but where might we increase protective factors using our research, our expertise, our academic departments, and where could we help reduce the risk factors? So that's a little bit of a quick, I actually taught a human development course for a couple semesters, so you've got a semester's worth right there in 2 minutes. I think these are universal principles of the human ecology, but they are so culturally specific. And I want to just point to a couple things and then talk specifically about what I have learned about Ebola from my colleagues in Liberia and what they're saying they need and want. Culturally specific, for example, what do we think is developmentally appropriate for a 7-year-old? The picture of the little girl with the child on the back. This is a 4-H club in Zambia. I was out there in the field with them. They were showing us their garden. But she was carrying her 2- or 3-year-old sibling with her, and that was a normally accepted practice. The picture of this is the other pictures from my basement. That's Mr. Umaru Sharif, who's the head of 4-H Liberia, and those are neighborhood children and colleagues' children. I would never turn any of those children loose with a 2-year-old on their back. But they're wonderful kids, but it's just a difference in what is appropriate, and we have to put that lens in play as we think about how we might respond. I just tossed in a few more to point out some of the similarities. These are school gardens. One's in Liberia. Guess which one? One is somewhere in Missouri. I love the school garden picture in Liberia because if you look really closely at the one child, how many of you parents would send your child to school with a machete? Yeah. That's what that little boy has. They're clearing the garden. So in that context, that's how they planned and grew their garden, and the children brought their own tools, and there's 7-year-olds out there with machetes as tall as they are, and that's, and I went, oh my gosh, but we have to put our cultural lens aside and be able to think about how do we respond with partners around the world. School lunch. Obviously, one of these is in Liberia, and one of these is not. And I love and also what we think of as bad roads, and I think the question, Umar Sharif sent me this picture of the roads in Liberia, and he said, we were trying to go out to a 4-H club meeting, and you can tell we didn't get there. And the other one I think is in Boston. So my point is, the principles of human ecological development, of human development and ecological perspective are pretty universal, but they have to be culturally specific. We have to be able to bring that to bear. So as we think about the human ecology of Ebola, I actually, the organizers of the committee somewhere have a little handout that I want you guys to look at very quickly. Could you guys be passing that out real quick? As we think about the human ecology of Ebola, and again, I'm speaking now about what I've learned working with my friends in Liberia, and I have not been in Liberia. Has anybody been in Liberia in this group? Anybody been in Liberia? Okay, I should call on you to add context when the time comes. All of those systems are in play, and all of those systems are reflected in our university. And so there are ways that each academic department, each person could make an impact on the conditions related to Ebola. What I asked him to hand out to you, many of you probably know that because of the Ebola crisis, all of the schools were closed in Liberia since last July. They just reopened early in March. So they had almost 9 months where the schools were closed. There were no, public gatherings were prohibited. I think no more than 5 people could meet at a time. There was a period of time when that was prohibited. Many public workers did not come to work because they were not allowed to because of the issues of transmission of disease. So it created a really, really difficult situation. In January, the Ministry of Education released a protocol for schools in Liberia to reopen. And that's what I asked. This is in your handout, conference handout, you'll have a set of those materials, a full protocol, as well as a report from the UN. But this is the checklist that schools have to meet in order to be declared safe and Ebola-free and to reopen. And my question for you, and I just give you a second and maybe turn to a person beside you. I'm an extension person. You have to do some kind of engagement thing in here besides the underwear thing. Turn to someone beside you and say, where do I see myself in this? Is there something that has to happen in terms of schools reopening that I could contribute to from my academic discipline or my knowledge about how schools work, communities work, markets work? So just take a quick second and look at it, and then I know we've gone a little longer than our time frame, so as we think about Ebola, imagine if it was in this country and thousands of people had died, and we have one of our poster sessions was about Sierra Leone, and I really appreciate that too. And in Liberia, many schools were used as care facilities for persons who were ill or dying. And so in places like West End, I think that their schools were used for quarantine centers. And now children are going to go back to those schools. So if you were a parent, how would you feel about your child returning to a public facility where people had bled and died and been treated and all of those things? There would be a great deal of fear and concern, and that's true there as well. Recently, there's in your packet of conference materials also, there's a lengthy report that was done, that's a UN research, that looked at what did parents and teachers and school personnel and kids say about going back to school. And so I'm not going to read this to you. They did say they're going to come back to school, but some of the things that they said, okay, you have to have functional latrines. You saw that on the checklist. That has to be part of it. Well, only 31% of the schools don't have functional latrines right now. And on average, they have one latrine for every 123 students. I'm sharing this just to get that sometimes there's a contrast between the policy, which is a good policy, which is what this handout is about, but the reality of what folks are going to have to deal with. Kids that were interviewed said, I don't feel safe or comfortable using a latrine in my school. Schools said only 40% of them said they have soap and water for hand washing, and yet that's a requirement to reopen. This one for the healthcare folks in the crowd. If you have a child or a teacher or a school personnel that's been identified, you quarantine them, and then you have to take them or get them to the nearest health facility. Well, they found that the closest health facility was on average a 46-minute walk, not a drive, not a cab, but a walk to get there. The other piece that I think is that the school has to be clean. Well, when they did this survey, they found out that in general it's students who are cleaning the schools or unpaid community members. So my point would be there were also assets. They'd already started working, they had PTAs, community members were supportive, the schools were being visited by the health officials and education officials. The point would be that as we think about a crisis like Ebola, there are many, many places that Extension, this university, could have an impact. And I think our challenge is to say, of all the ways that Ebola is playing out, and just using that as an example, where could we make the greatest impact right away, both for the immediate urgent needs, but what is it that we could contribute that would also help the initiative to be sustainable and continuing after we're gone? So those are my questions. I don't have good answers for it, but I think that I'm confident that this is the kind of thing that this university and other universities can do better than anyone else. So thanks for the chance to talk about it.